artists around the world. Teaching artists around the world. Artists around the world. Teaching artists around the world.
All right, well, listen, without further ado, why don't we hand it over to Mark, who needs no introduction, and an instructor at our school for those that haven't taken his course. I suggest you do. He'll be back in the fall. We also, just to put a plug in there, we have a course by myself, some art labs by Amber and Veronica Jackson. And we, come on over and do a summer workshop with us. But we're looking forward to seeing you guys. Our fall listings will be coming out shortly. And without further ado, let's hand it over to Mark Dion. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much. I'm extremely happy to be back with my alternative art school family. NATO has asked me to come back, so I'm excited to do another class. And my friend Danielle, I think, is here as well. And I could not do a class without her. So she's my right hand in all of these, in all of this process. So I thought what I would do is just, I guess, kind of show you a bunch of greatest hits. Maybe, when a band comes to town, you don't want them all to just play new material. You want to hear the greatest hits. So I'm gonna just ramble on and talk about projects really for almost more than 20 years. So let me just see if this all works. Oh, here we go. I'm sort of amazed somehow it works. I'm sorry, someone's printing something in my room right now as well. I'm going to start off by taking you to the great city of Venice. Venice is a city of remarkable history, great architecture, great art history, has a strong place in literature and design, and is also a city of very disgusting mud, right? And if any of you have ever been to Venice, at low tide, you probably know a little bit of what I'm talking about. The city, of course, everything travels through canals in Venice. There's no car traffic, and so if you need to get a refrigerator, or a television, or washing machine, it usually comes to you by barge. And of course, if those things break down and you need to get rid of them, it might have to leave by barge, unless, of course, in the middle of the night, it should get too close to the edge of the canal and there's a gentle plop and you've saved yourself a lot of money. All of these things accumulate in the bottom of the canal, and the city has a solution to this, which is a navy of barges, which identify areas and sail to these canals, and they dredge the bottom of the canal. Of course, the mud at the bottom of the canal is moving like the water, just at a much slower pace. So to keep water traffic moving, you need to dredge the canals, and the city's barges reach down with their claw arm, pull up the mud from the bottom, put that into the center of the barge, and then they sail it out to a specific area of the lagoon and they dump it. And this goes on day after day, boat after boat, all the time. So I was invited to be a guest of the Nordic Pavilion of the Venice Biennale, because I am truly the Nordic ideal, as you can recognize. And I was curious to see what was in the contents of one of these barges. So I convinced the city to give me one of the barges, all the material collected in one of the barges from just one of the halls. And I placed this outside the beautiful Nordic Pavilion.
Salad back in the fridge.
Sorry. Oh. So this did not make us friends with our surrounding pavilions, because this material is pretty fragrant, right? It smells a lot like rotten eggs, but it is also incredibly archaeologically rich, right? You couldn't possibly stick a pencil into this material without hitting something. There's just so much human-made stuff inside of it. So my project was to clean and sort this sample and remove all of the human-made material from inside over the course of the summer. So this was incredibly hard. like a lot of my archaeological projects, there's sort of three different sections. There's the dig itself, in this case, this material outside. There's the processing, and then there's the exhibition of the material. So I turned the pavilion's storage room into my exhibition space. And so I wanted to make something that was in between, a sort of a medieval treasure trove and a Renaissance Wunderkammer. So, but of course, I don't have precious metals. I have bits of oxidized iron, and I don't have pearls. I have broken white ceramics, and I don't have emeralds. I have broken green bottles. I don't have a crocodile to hang from the ceiling, but I have these really interesting things that are found in this one sample. And there are archaeology museums, many of them in Italy, and they do a very fine job. So my job is not to kind of present this stuff as an archaeological museum would. So I don't want to tell you about the the evolution of design, how changes in technology change the materiality of culture. I don't want to show you how one society's design and sensibility might infiltrate another's over a period of time. I'm putting things together in other kinds of ways, in somewhat perhaps sometimes informal ways. Sometimes I'm almost in childish ways, like putting things together based on association and trying to present this stuff as if I don't really know what it is, as if I am that proverbial Martian archaeologist who comes here and doesn't know the purpose of these things, and are just grouping them based on some formal similarities. But at the same time, I can't help but mess with your expectations of what a presentation like this might do and should do. So this is a small selection of ceramics. Venice is not an ancient city by Italian standards at all. It's quite recent city compared to many other places in Italy. But still, I'm finding a lot of ceramics from the Middle Ages, from the Renaissance, from the Enlightenment, and very contemporary ceramics as well in this sample. And you can see from this image that everything is very carefully marked. But if you try to find the reference for that mark, if you try to find the reference for, say, number 27, you'll go mad because it doesn't exist. So I'm trying to, in some way, enact aspects of what a museum should do and could do, but I'm not actually following through. So my idea is generally to kind of frustrate your expectations of what you might find in an exhibition like this, and to make it about something else. Lastly, when you go through that display space, the museum space, you find yourself in the studio or the studiolo, and you see, very often you will see me in the process of cleaning and sorting this material. So I have all of the stuff that I found in the sample. You can begin to see the sorting process, groups of things being made, decisions being made, categories being made, maybe categories that don't even exist in the museum aspect. But you see sort of roads not taken as well. So I'm always interested in foregrounding process, in this work. So, I've never seen a work of art that was more exciting in the museum than it was in the artist studio. At the same time, I don't have the ability to take every visitor by the hand and take them to a studio. So I want to, in some way, maybe even in the theatrical way, give them an approximation of what goes on in the studio, how decisions are made, how things come together. So that's, for me, like the very lively part of this project, and many of the other projects that have this somewhat performative aspect. And of course, this was, the worst summer of my entire life, right? This was incredibly hard. The Biennale is extremely crowded. Italy is very hot in the summer. The stuff stinks, and it's sticky, and it's very oily. And I had to get hepatitis shots, and I had to get tetanus shots. And so, but at the same time, this was an incredibly well-received project, and people really got into that, especially the aspect of process, and it was very hard to actually get work done while there were open hours, because I would just be inundated with people asking questions and wanting to know more and wanting to know more about me. But in the end, the stresses of doing it were so much that I thought, well, I'm just going to retire. No more of these archaeological projects. I'm retiring from archaeology.
That is very labor intensive, Mark.
Yeah. So for my next archaeology project, I worked on the Thames in London. And so I wanted to do a project that addressed this situation in which this was the year before the Tate opened what's called Tate Modern. So before there'd always been the Tate Gallery, and now that's called Tate Britain. This is Tate Modern. And I wanted to talk about these two different sites linked by the river, but having really different social histories to them, right? I mean, and that those social histories are played out on the foreshore. The foreshore is this area that you see all these people standing on, which is exposed twice a day. The Thames is an incredibly tidal river, right? So twice a day, this area is exposed, usually for about 4 hours. And the foreshore is impossibly archaeologically rich, right? I mean, it's incredible. If you look down at any point, you see the history of London in a fragmentary archaeological sense right in front of you. And of course, London is a really ancient city, much more ancient than Venice. And elements of that history are there under your feet on the foreshore. So I worked with a team of we call them volunteers. I don't know why we call them volunteers, because everyone's actually paid and paid pretty well. But a group of people who were either half of them were under 17 and half of them were over 65. So pensioners and teenagers. And every day we would identify an area. We did 1 week at Bankside, where Tate Modern is, 1 week at Millbank, where the Tate Gallery is, collecting for a period of about 4 hours, working with about 22 people, instructed to collect every human-made thing from an identified area that we would go to. So we would take, we'd sort of mark out an area and thoroughly go over that. We're not really digging, we're doing mostly surface finds, right? And with that many people, you can collect like an enormous amount of stuff, right? The Thames is generally considered by archaeologists insignificant and disturbed as a site because of the river itself. The river is extremely strong, so every time it goes in and out, it's like a new roll of the dice as to what you might find. And there's no context there, right? Archaeologists are really interested in things in relationship to other things in a strata. And that doesn't exist on the Thames. Everything is all mixed up in a sense. So it's not considered a very useful archaeological location. It's a disturbed location. So that's my group there, going out onto the river. You see, there's also a little group on the river. This is the summer solstice, and that's like a group of witches who are doing a summer solstice baptism there. There's a lot of magic still going on the Thames. I worked with amazing people who I'd worked with before. This is Lenka Clayton, who I think is a really fantastic artist who lives in Pittsburgh now, who is just an extraordinary artist who is from Cornwall, and we'd worked together on a number of projects. That's Naomi Beckwith, who I also worked with on a number of projects since she was 16 in Chicago. So they were my project managers. I couldn't ask for a better team. And then I had this incredible group of energetic, intelligent people to work with, including these two ladies, Hamsini and Alexis, who just had, these two girls had the sharpest eye in terms of like finding things. They could find brass pins and needles, and just the tiniest little beads and things. Just some people just have this incredible acumen for finding stuff. So this is sort of my group at Bankside on the last day of our dig. So from there, the next stage is we take all of the material we found and we bring it to the lawn of the Tate. Lawn of the Tate is very packed. It's really like, it's like the court of the Louvre or the steps of the Metropolitan in New York or the steps of the Art Institute of Chicago in the summer, full of people. And so we build these sort of Indiana Jones style tents. We kind of colonize the colonizer in a sense. And these tents contain all of the finds from each of the sites. So Millbank and Bankside. And over the course of the summer, my team and I, we remove every single object and everything gets cleaned, cataloged, and placed safely. So there's this tape that kind of separates us from the public, but the general rule is unless you are an obvious dangerous lunatic, you're allowed to come behind the tape and chat with us. People love to come and chat with us, and they tended to treat us a little bit like we were the Antiques Roadshow. They wanted to know what was the most valuable thing we found, what was the oldest thing we found. And people would come back over and over and over again. And we had a lot of interaction also with artists. Like Peter Blake would love to come and chat with us and hang out. And Anthony Gormley as well would love to just come and hang out and talk to the volunteers and see what we were finding. People like this wonderful dandy would come snoop around inside the tent. So people are allowed to snoop around inside the tents. Every day we did a lunchtime lecture about the Thames and people's relationship to the Thames. So we had art historians talking about Turner's relationship to the Thames. We had someone from the Globe Theatre talking about how people would come across from the City of London proper to Bankside to attend theatre. And we had the Thames police force talk about finding bodies, and the harbor master and social historians and archaeologists. So, every day we just found out more and more. It's almost like we did the research about the project while we were doing the project. And this is like super hard work. The stuff is really coated with mud and grime. And, it's not the most pleasant thing to be out there in the sun. But, I had a really good devoted team. This is just like a small section of some of the bones from Bankside. Bankside was, it's the part of London where the things that might be offensive to the proper people of the City of London would happen in Bankside. So that's where the slaughterhouses were, the vinegar factories, the brothels, the theater, the bear baiting pits. All of that is Bankside, and this is just evidence of some of that activity. So, and we're going through cleaning everything, and then this constant process of refining and refining and refining. So first we clean everything, then we're kind of separating green glass from clear glass, from brown glass, from purple glass, bottle necks and bottle bottoms, bottles that have writing on them, refining and refining and refining until we run out the clock, basically. Then I construct this enormous double-sided cabinet, and this cabinet really contains about 99% of what we found. There's a bicycle or two, a dead dog. There are a few things that don't make the cut, but otherwise it's all here. And it's based on the early British Museum cabinets. So it has a similar design, and like early cabinets, it also has a similar element of interactivity, right? You can open the drawers, you can open the cupboards, and it is absolutely filled, right? So you would think that maybe an aspect of this is that because it's double-sided, one side Bankside, one side Millbank, that the thesis of this would be that you would have a comparative analysis of cultural material. But of course, I don't show the same kinds of things. Again, I want to frustrate what would be the most obvious thing to do, right? Which would be to make kind of a comparison between the two sites. And in fact, I don't even show you everything because I can't show you every phone, every ID card, every pen, every human tooth, every bank card, every voodoo doll. We just can't show everything. So I want to show that I can't show everything. So you don't get the impression that there's anything natural about the way that this is installed or anything scientific about the way that this is installed, that it could be entirely differently installed. And you see that very much when you start to open the drawers. And you begin to see that there are systems of classification. So one drawer, things might be organized by the color spectrum, right? So you would have things organized by the color spectrum. The next drawer might be things, might be ceramics organized by size from smallest to largest. The next might be organized by utility, it might be fasteners. And so what you end up with is really a kind of encyclopedia of taxonomies, an encyclopedia of how things might come together. And again, these drawers are meant to be pulled out. There's even a greatest hits drawer, which has a contemporary voodoo doll and 16th century ceramics, a 400 million year old sea urchin fossil, teeth from the bears from the bear baiting pits, bit of a medieval lice comb, bullets from the Second World War, the few rings that we found, child's shoe from the 19th century. And then lastly, last part of the that installation are photographs of all of the people who worked on the project. So not just the so-called volunteers, but also people like the Tate publicity staff and the project manager, and people who often don't get credited for a project like this. And a project like this just involves a lot of different people. And on the label is usually just the artist name. So this is a way to try to find an equivalent for like movie credits. At the end of the film, the credits go up and you realize like, oh, a lot of people actually made this thing. It wasn't just the person who directed it. There's someone drove the cars, and someone did the lighting, and someone was the best boy, whatever that is, and so all of that, this is a kind of my elegant way to kind of solve that problem. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about of works that are, I kind of put under this category of follies. These are works that are generally outside, that have an aspect of public art to them. And, I love public art, but I think public art is also the realm where the worst crimes of aesthetics are committed in some sense. So I'm always looking for what might be like a good solution to finding a public art model. Obviously monuments are highly problematic. Plop art is not really stimulating to me. So, and I started to look back into the history of follies, these sort of diminutive buildings that are made usually on the estates of the aristocrats and the super rich, and are meant to entertain, to create a sense of the picturesque, they're buildings that don't really have a practical function, but their function is to generate meaning, right? Is to be discursive. And so I thought that's something that I think we can wrestle away from its aristocratic roots, and I could make something that is a piece of architecture, is an actual sculpture, and also can be a vitrine for an installation or a space that people can enter. And like follies, they're very placeful. So this one is in Tijuana Estuary Wildlife Reserve, which is an incredibly strange little park on the border of the United States and Mexico, between San Diego and Tijuana. It's on the north side of that border. But this is where, when you see images of the fence that goes into the ocean, this is where that is. And for a variety of reasons, this area was not developed. It's surrounded by development. And one reason is that it was a garbage dump, and it was considered like a not very valuable land. This is where the Tijuana River empties into the Pacific Ocean. So it's a place where, you have a lot of animals are kind of shoehorned into this area because it's one of the few wildish places. So if you're a fish who needs to swim upriver, this is your best shot in many miles. If you're a garbage eating skunk or raccoon, this is probably where you sleep it off. In the daytime, all the birds are kind of funneled into this spot. If you're a bird who needs to lay eggs on a beach, this is your best chance. This is one of the few beaches in many miles, both sides of the border, that you could actually lay your eggs on. So all these animals are shoehorned into this landscape, but this landscape is incredibly contested. Of course, it's right on the border, so there are people coming across the border, and there are people trying to stop them from coming across the border. It's adjacent to sprawling Southern California suburbs. So there's lots of kids with their BMX bikes who want to ride their BMX bikes in the park, and there are park rangers who are chasing them off the park. The Navy trains its helicopter pilots by flying over this area. So you can never be here without 1 to 4 helicopters, sometimes with Navy SEALs dangling from them, like in this landscape. So it's not the most restful wildlife reserve you've ever heard of. So I wanted to do something that reflected that history of mischief, to build this kind of structure that looks like it could be from the border cops, it could be a surveillance station, or it could be left over from when the Navy occupied this land, or whatever it is. It looks like a building that's up to no good. And you see this piece by giving the park person your ID, and then they give you a key, and you hike out. It's about 1.5 miles, so none of my friends from New York City saw this. And then you open it up, and instead of something constructed around mischief, it is actually a mecca for birders, for bird watchers. So you open this up, and it's full of all of the things that bird watchers love. It has books and field guides, it has lists, it has charts, it has calendars of migration, it has optics, it has photography equipment, it has watercolors, it has images of the birds, and maps, and all of this kind of information. And it doesn't suggest that you leave anytime soon. You're allowed to spend as much time as you want there. And it is sited on a marvelous bomb crater, because the Navy also used to test its bombardments in this park. So there are these giant bomb craters that are full of water and that attract lots and lots of birds. So you're allowed to come in here and use all of the equipment and stay as long as you want. And this piece was there for a number, I think like 6 months or something, and not one thing was stolen or broken, or like, people were incredibly respectful in terms of how to use the place. There's a kind of wall of a hall of fame of people who've done a lot of things for birds, like Marjorie Stoneham Douglas, Roger Torrey Peterson, Rachel Carson. There are photographs of birds in their native environments. Of course, they're really photographs of dioramas of dead birds, but no one needs to know that. There's a chart in case you want to build a bird. There's some x-rays of birds who have run into trouble in the park and been rehabilitated, had been shot or run over and then have been fixed. So, like I said, my friends in New York couldn't see that piece, so we made one for them, right? So this is the Urban Wildlife Observation Unit, which is in Madison Square Park in New York City, which is the park on 23rd Street across from the Flatiron Building. Oh, what happened there? There we go. So I manned this with a incredibly talented and skillful DJ, who was probably the most ignorant person of the natural world I'd ever met. But his job wasn't to teach you anything about nature. His job was to try to coax you into the building, to use our ample resources, our books, our optics, we kind of trick this out with a little bit more of an American Museum of Natural History kind of style. It has a diorama that features rats and pigeons and cockroaches. And so it talks very much about the history of natural history as it's kind of represented in Madison Square Park. And even though Madison Square Park has the kind of biodiversity of a parking lot in some cases, it does have some absolutely fascinating stories of some of the plants and animals who are there, all of which are intertwined with human interaction, right? There's pretty much nothing in Madison Square Park which isn't there because of humans moving things around the world. And so if you didn't have time to come and spend time indoors and do the research yourself, we also produce this field guide, which you can take home and use to look up the it has entrance for things like grass and dogs and Dutch elm disease and cockroaches and pigeons and the things that you probably would actually encounter if you go to Madison Square Park. Often, I think one of my jobs as an artist is to come someplace and kind of look for this, try to find the red thread, try to find this thing that makes this place interesting and different, and maybe it's something that is so common that local people don't even see it anymore, in a sense. So I come in with somewhat fresh eyes and see something that maybe others don't. This site, for instance, is in Essen, Germany, and Essen is a place which has a lot of issues with hydrology, because it was a former coal mining site and was so extensively mined that the ground is subsiding, and it's very difficult for them to do things with water. So I went to a site. I knew I wanted to work with water, and the biggest site there was a marina, and I went to this marina on a bitterly cold February with my guide, who was showing me around. And we walked around this marina, and it was completely frozen solid. And out in the distance, where there were some birds, and we were practically hypothermic with cold. And then we saw a small construction building, and out of this construction building, there was billowing some smoke. And my guide said, "I think we can get coffee here." And we opened the door, and out pours cigarette smoke and roaring laughter. And this is kind of like in the middle of nowhere at 9 o'clock in the morning. And we look inside, and there's a bar with some picnic tables, and there are all of these big guys, kind of backslapping and drinking schnapps. And the walls of this place like caramel colored from years and years of cigarette smoke. And this pinup girls pictured behind the bars. And it's like this very macho, weird place in the middle of nowhere. And I think, what is this place? And I say, oh, this is the Fisherman's Club. And the Fisherman's Club, when does fishing season open? And they say, oh, usually around mid-May. And so I think, so these guys get together all the time in this place and have this roaringly great time, just because of their relationship with fish. I said, yeah. So I thought, okay, I want to make a competitive club that's not for machos, but for dandies. And so I found this oxygen tank that belonged to the sewage treatment plant, and I worked with the apprentices of the sewage treatment plant to retrofit this. And so they gave me a hobbit door and a big an observation deck, and we opened up some windows, and we created the Amateur Ornithologist Club, where gentlefolk can come and talk about birds. And you can come and if you bring your lunch, you can dine off of our bird-themed china, and you're certainly able to access our optics to look at birds and our extensive library on birds. And you can come and sit on our clawfoot sofa. And everything in this structure is dedicated to the appreciation of birds. And there's an attendant, and she will help introduce you to the fine art of bird identification and keep track of all the birds that you see and that are seen there. And there are records of all of the things that we see there. You can see there's a frieze of people who have contributed to amateur ornithology, including Sibley and Peterson and Buick and Ray. And it is a club after all, so it is about drinking and smoking. So you can smoke larks, and you can drink wild turkey, gray goose, famous grouse, cockspur, and Parrot Bay rum. So, and it is, there just is an awful lot of great bird kitsch in Germany. So this was one of those projects where the shopping is pretty much my favorite thing to do in any project. So going to secondhand shops and securing all of this bird-themed material was enormously delightful. So taking that idea of finding the thread and finding something about a place that feels different, that is different, and trying to build on that is is very much how I worked in this site, which is Folkestone. And Folkestone is in England. It's on the Channel. On a good day, you can easily see across to France. It's not so far from Dover. And Folkestone was, at the turn of the last century, in turn of the 19th and 20th century, was this place that was a great getaway. So before cheap airfares to places like Ibiza, British people would actually vacation on British beaches, and Folkestone was one of those places, and it had these grand hotels. This is a place where the Prince of Wales would take his mistress, and this is a place where people like Bernard Shaw and H.G. Wells had summer homes, and there's great remnants of that beautiful architecture, and of course there was a very active fishing industry that was totally destroyed by bad management. So there's a small fishery now for crabs, but not much of a fishery in general. So I grew up in a faded seaside town, so I kind of know a little bit about what this is like. And at the same time, there was something particular about Folkestone, which is not something that was part of my experience. People in Folkestone absolutely despised seagulls. And it was kind of like the conversation you would have is people would want to talk about gulls and talking about how much they hated them, how they were rats with wings. And I quite like gulls. I think gulls are amazingly interesting animals. And, people hated gulls because some people loved gulls too much, right? And those people fed gulls, and gulls are extremely intelligent and have really flexible behavior. So they learn to associate people with food very quickly. And so the gulls, the gulls know that on Friday people will get fish and chips, and if you zoom around the corner at 60 miles an hour, you can knock those fish and chips out of their hands, and all the gulls come and eat the French fries, and it seems like they're laughing at you, but they're not. There's a gull who understands how the Tesco electronic door works, so she can walk into the supermarket, grab a bag of potato chips, walk out, open that. She doesn't understand how capitalism works, but she really knows how that door works. And so, so people really despise the gulls because the gulls are kind of really in your face. And if you take your eye off your sandwich, if you're picnicking, the sandwich will be gone. So what gulls have is a problem, and what the gulls need is a mobile gull appreciation unit. So the mobile gull appreciation unit travels around the city of Folkestone, and my team of gull enthusiasts try to convince people that gulls are fascinating, complex animals, and gulls have been studied by ethologists for such a long time. It's really very possible to not to speak gull, but to understand a lot of what gulls are saying to each other. And through this, we kind of found out that the gull haters, although they're there, are actually just like a very noisy minority. They're kind of like the Tea Party. It seems like there's more of them because they're very loud, but in fact, well, a lot of people had extremely positive stories about gulls. A lot of people came and told us about hand rearing gulls or rescuing gulls. And so we ended up being more of a kind of clearinghouse for positive stories about gulls than trying to evangelically convince people to love gulls when they didn't. And of course, there is a field guide to this as well. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Well, first, oh my God. Well, first of all, and of course, we know that's just scratching the surface to the Dion incredible oeuvre, but let's give it up for Mark Dion's presentation. Not lacking in depth, curiosity, intrigue, historical specificity, geographic magic. So thank you, Mark. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Nana.
My Lord, I get so excited. And it must have been I'll do one question, then I'd love to get some questions for everybody. But I must say that Gull project must have been on your mind for some time, as you're like, I'm gonna do right by these damn birds.
Well, it never really occurred to me that people would despise gulls. Like I've never really seen that anywhere else. And it's true that the gulls there are aggressive in a way that they're just not here. But so I didn't have that in my back pocket because I had never experienced people's animosity toward this animal, which I always, for me, like when I hear a gull, it's like the thing that really brings me home, because
Well, there, I mean, if you ever go out on the shore, the Jersey Shore, the gulls do interfere with your beach-like experience there.
I guess I don't really go out on the Jersey Shore, but I grew up like gulls are not a problem. I've never had anything taken from my hands. From
They're
a gull.
beef-like, I tell you.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
so let's feel free, folks, to ask a question. You can just raise your hand or just chime in. It's pretty loose. And I also, Amber, thank you for mentioning. Welcome to our newsletter followers that joined in on the visiting artist series too. Thanks for getting a sense of our community here. So thank you for joining. Has anybody got a thought, provocation, question, curiosity? Go ahead. Oh, Ada.
Hi, Mark. Thank you. I'm curious about what happens to the work after you exhibit it. Maybe it's coming from like my emerging artist state, but I was like just curious. Like I don't know. It's kind of like, to me, it's like prioritizing things and like I don't know, like showcasing or like curating objects according to some level of importance that you find. So I'm just curious what happens after a while, if there's a way to preserve it as it is, or
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do a lot of projects where I'm also working with museums, and that's part, I didn't talk about this, but like a lot of museums bring me in very often to help recontextualize their collection and work with their collections. And sometimes that's Natural History Museum, or right now I'm working with the Nobel Prize Museum in Stockholm to imagine something with their collection. And so in those cases, all that stuff has to go back. And it doesn't matter what kind of structure I make for it, it has to go back. And I always feel like it has to go back too soon, because it takes years to develop one of these projects. And then after 4 months, everything goes back. But with the archaeological projects, they're very often anything I find cannot leave the country, right? Because these whatever, for instance, whatever you find in Italy, in Italian soil or in Italian water, is property of the Italian government. So that can't really leave the country, but it can still, with special circumstances, be collected as long as it stays within the country. And or with a project like the Thames dig, that actually belongs to the Tate. So and the Tate and London has very particular rules about what's found on the seashore, but because it belongs it's in a public collection, so that cabinet still exists. In fact, it's on view right now at Tate Modern. So often things have certain conditions, but my idea is that they would stay together and have their integrity as objects, but also have their identity as an artwork. That I think in some way, I always feel like these works are, we could call them sculpture or installation or something, but I also feel like they are artifacts of an activity, right? And so they do have this artifactual quality to them.
Hey, Mark, just a needle on that, and then I'll get to Paul. Thanks, Paul, for raising your hand. We'll go to you next. But Mark, in terms of that, did like the Tate or these places, you make these big projects, do they buy them outright from the get, or do they go through your gallery? How is that acquisition part worked out?
Usually they don't buy them outright. That would be nice. I mean, there is a sort of commission phase, right? And I usually charge to make the proposal, right? A little bit, because it takes time. And then I charge something for actually doing the project, and then try to sell the work at the end as well. And I haven't had projects like this that are so labor intensive that everyone says, oh, we don't really want it. Because in that case, I don't know, I might have to like throw everything back into the river. But they do tend to work with my gallery and kind of buy them at a highly discounted price.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they clearly get a deal. I can already feel it. I mean, that is not only labor intensive, but just such a magical object to own that then they also probably put on display, like you mentioned at the Tate, over and over again.
Yeah, that piece is really popular. I'm happy to say that I once had this situation where my wife and I were in London, and some of her Irish relatives were in London, and one of her cousin's boyfriends was with them, and we all met at a pub. And he said, "Oh yeah, we spent the day at the Tate," and I knew that they were not art people, and they said, "What'd you think?" He said, "Oh, most of that is shite, but there was this one piece that I really liked, and it was my work, and I felt like, okay, I'm vindicated. Finally, this is the audience I want to reach."
Well, it is. There's a lot of curiosity into that. Hey, Paul, go ahead if you can join in.
Thank you, Nate. So thank you. Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for that excellent talk. It's been absolutely brilliant. I'm really excited about kind of like listening to you talk about contextualize your work. When I was looking at your work, I was very much thinking about, Hal Foster and that notion of the ethnographic turn in art practice. And, very much in my mind when I was looking at it. And I was wondering about if you have any kind of thoughts about this idea of, do you have an interest in this idea of appropriation of, anthropological field work? Do you see it as an art practice or a performance? The idea of like maybe field work as an aesthetic or a visual practice. What do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, Hal is quite negative about the ethnographic turn, but I actually see a lot of potential in that sensibility, and I always feel like I am, I'm not an archaeologist, and to me, these projects are not really archaeology, although lots and lots of archaeologists have written about these projects, arguing that they actually are archaeology, right? And which kind of was very surprising to me when people started to send me papers arguing that this is legitimate archaeology, when I never thought about it in that sense. But I do think about what I'm doing as sort of shadowing a methodology, and I'm shadowing sometimes scientific methodologies and especially field methodologies, but I'm not following through. Like, I think that no scientist would ever mistake what I'm doing as science. I mean, it's really very clear to them, and it's very clear to me, but it might not always be clear to an art audience who maybe doesn't have experience with science and understanding that science has really quite rigid rules, and the minute you cross one of those borders, you're not doing science anymore. And so I'm not sort of developing such a rigid thesis when I make these projects. I'm hoping that the viewer kind of creates the thesis, right? And I'm hoping that it's as much a collaboration with the viewer as it is with the site. But I don't expect that the viewer's going to, the viewer's conclusions will be identical to my conclusions, right? I want these pieces to be very generative for the people who see them, and also the people who participate in them are very often, that is like a real bullseye audience for me. I think about the audience in this kind of expansive way, and the people who are on one of these digs, they get the most out of it because they're really part of the whole thing. And I think a lot about, that might be a small group of people, but it's an important group of people to me.
It's just anecdotally, and then we'll go to Shell, but Lenka Clayton is actually one of our visiting artists next semester.
Oh, that's amazing.
And she was one of your digging volunteer, quote unquote.
Well, no, she was like the manager. She was, so Lenka I worked with on a project. I've known her since I don't know if she might have been still a teenager when I met her, but she was she's a brilliant artist, I think, and she was brilliant the day I met her, and her work was already very developed when she was still in school. But we worked on a garden project together in Lancaster, and then on the Thames project, and we've been in touch ever since. She's doing this amazing project in Pittsburgh right now. She's great. She is great, and kudos to her, because nobody ever referred to me in high school as genius or anything interesting.
Shell, let's go over to you. And by the way, hi, Shell.
Hi, good to see everyone. I apologize, I had to come late, but I'm just curious if I got this right. The different booths with the river project, did you invite like associations who saw their mission, a particular mission, so that you had a variety of speakers and different types of engagements along the
Yeah.
river?
You're talking about the lunchtime lectures that we did?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a real wide variety of people. So people who had practical relationships with the river, like the harbor master, and people who had theoretical relationships with the river, who like social historians, and then people like the art historians at the Tate. So it was an incredibly wide variety of people who, people who are working on ecological aspects of the river, people, of course, from the Natural History Museum talking about the, so, I worked with a lot of different institutions in London, all of which were incredibly generous to send us these brilliant speakers to talk to the team and I every day.
Because I live in San Antonio, Texas, and
Oh yeah.
once a year they drain the river so that they can collect all these things, like, they find cell phones and guns
Sure.
and things like that. And it just seems like to mirror your project along the river would be an excellent sort of thing, so that it becomes more than people just seeing the empty river.
Yeah, well, I really like San Antonio, so, and yeah, that'd be a lot of fun.
Oh, all right, Mark, go on there, it's a good chance to get some good boots too, by the way.
Yeah,
Thanks, Shell. I saw you, Cloudy, but we only have time for one more question. It's gonna be Seda. Seda, and then we're gonna have to round out because we're heading towards noon. Seda, that's your
Okay,
question.
thanks. Well, first I wanted to say I worked on an archaeological dig one summer, and the memories stayed for it's been 25 years or something. But so I'm sure the people on your dig had a great experience. But I wanted to ask about the objects, and about since you were finding all kinds of objects, including voodoo dolls, any sort of magic that may have happened through the objects that you sort of think?
Well, I was very surprised at how much the Thames is still like a site of magic. We found so many magic squares that were like messages in bottles that were actually like Islamic magic squares, and we found Hindu offerings all the time, which we obviously didn't collect those, and we ran into practicing witches on the river. So there was a lot of, that's just not something I had anticipated or thought about at all. But it was clear that the Thames is still has a very strong place in the world of people who practice magic in Britain.
Well, I love ending on the note on the magical archaeology. I think that's a delight, because certainly this has been magical archaeology. Thank you, Mark. Thanks for everyone for joining us. Listen, for those at the newsletter, if Amber, do you mind putting the link in the chat, you can certainly feel free to join us. We have that after every visiting artist thing. It's just a time to meet each other and chew the cud and talk and just get to know. So certainly join that. And for everybody, once again, thank you, Mark Dion, for a great visiting artist. And please sign up for his class in the fall.
Mark.
Chew on the cud, yeah. All right, guys, ciao. Ciao, ciao.
Yeah.
Artists around the world, teaching artists around the